Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with protests that have popped up across this country, disrupting travel and trade. They're a show of solidarity for a small group of hereditary chiefs in northern British Columbia who don't want a natural gas pipeline crossing their land, even though it has the support of 20 elected band councils along the route. In Victoria, protesters blocked entrances to the provincial legislature hours before the spring session was due to start. And in Toronto, they obstructed a major intersection, bringing traffic to a standstill. And protesters are crippling rail lines, too. Via Rail says it's been forced to cancel 157 passenger trains because of protests on the tracks, disrupting travel for 24,000 people. And today, CN Rail said it's been forced to shut down parts of its network of freight trains.
It is actually also illegal because it infringes on the Railway Safety Act. For obvious reasons, it's dangerous to actually block the rails when that is happening. And so we're very concerned about it from that point of view.
The Transport Minister says it's up to the provinces to get injunctions to remove the protesters. What started as a blockade on a remote forest access road in northern BC has now become a rallying cry for supporters across the country who are using the hashtag #ShutDownCanada. We'll take you to northern BC in just a moment, but we begin with Eric Sorensen on what the protesters want.
More than 3,000 kilometers from the proposed gas pipeline in northern BC, the Tyendinaga Mohawk have taken a stand in eastern Ontario. Via Rail forced to cancel dozens of passenger trains through the most populated rail corridor in the country. CN says the impact is being felt beyond Canada's borders and is harming the country's reputation as a stable and viable supply chain partner. The dispute centers on the proposed Coastal GasLink pipeline in northern BC. Several Wet'suwet'en bands along the route support it, but hereditary leaders by and large do not. And several protesters who set up blockades were arrested, sparking protests across the country. Here's the issue. The pipeline would deliver natural gas for export from near Dawson Creek, 670 kilometers to the Pacific coast at Kitimat. But the route bisects the Wet'suwet'en traditional territory. The protests began near Houston, BC. But after the Mounties made arrests, the protests began to spread to the Port of Vancouver and the BC legislature and cities across the country. Some one-day protests. Others involve ongoing blockades of rail lines, CN lines in northern BC and in eastern Ontario, and a CP rail line near Montreal. A small blockade is all it takes on the Kahnawake Reserve outside Montreal. The snow-covered tracks tell the story. The trains aren't running. Protests in response began last week in BC, including one outside the Port of Vancouver. Today, at the container terminal in Halifax, a demonstration by Mi'kmaq First Nations showing coast-to-coast solidarity.
Enough is enough. We want Canada to wake up. This is not what reconciliation is. It's not what reconciliation should look like.
One protest brought the dispute right into the Toronto offices of the Federal Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Carolyn Bennett.
They will never agree to a pipeline on their territory.
The minister would not comment publicly, but clearly doesn't want to be drawn into this dispute, issuing a statement that the Coastal GasLink project falls under provincial jurisdiction and that no order of government can direct the RCMP. But others say it's not just about a pipeline. It's about Indigenous rights that Ottawa and the provinces cannot sidestep.
This is about Native sovereignty, Native law, and the right to make decisions to what happens to them, their nations, and their lands.
Why do we want it? Now!
Indigenous and other protesters are relatively small in number, but they're showing the potential for disruption exists all over the country. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
The natural gas pipeline at the heart of this has the support of 20 elected band councils along the route. All of them have signed benefit agreements with Coastal GasLink. They believe it will help communities become less reliant on federal funding. It's a few Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs and their supporters who are blocking construction of it and who the RCMP have been arresting. Global's Sarah MacDonald is near the site in northern BC tonight. Sarah?
Donna, court appearances today for those arrested here in northern BC on Monday, where that lucrative pipeline project is deeply divisive. 7 arrests at the longest-standing holdout in Wet'suwet'en Nation outside of Houston, BC on Monday marked the end of the enforcement of the injunction. 28 people opposed to that natural gas pipeline have now been arrested for refusing to leave the unceded territory that pipeline is slated to run through. But many members of that same First Nation want the pipeline built. It's an initiative promising jobs and funding to Indigenous communities in exchange for access to their resources. It may be lucrative, but still, it's also polarizing, drawing a deep wedge between those for and against it.
The benefits of our people working out there, that they have gainful employment and if they can provide for their families.
I've not heard anybody who said, I love this pipeline, I'm so happy it's going ahead. What people have said is, I want the job. I want a good paying job.
The livelihoods of many British Columbians in this region depend on that injunction remaining impactful and the road to their work site remaining clear of obstructions. The question is how long it will stay that way, with work expected to resume this week. Donna.
All right, Sarah MacDonald in Smithers, BC, thanks.